might not be able to hear it.
Can everybody hear this?
Yeah.
Is this okay? All right, I'll make sure I try not to keep the mic during this. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. Plenty of food in the back, it looks like, so if you haven't grabbed any of that yet, please go ahead and do so. My name is Brizendine. I live right up the street in Madeira. A little bit about me, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, so not too far from here, and then moved down here in 2000 to take a job with P&G. And then after 12 years at P&G, decided that the pull to do things other than things at P&G was just too strong. And so I ended up leaving to do other stuff. So I started my own company last year. I do a couple of different things. I am a personal trainer, as Betsy said. I really focus on fathers and daughters. My background at P&G is in digital marketing, so there's a lot of stuff on the internet. So there's a lot of different things that I do, but it definitely keeps me from being bored, that is for sure. So my typical day is like, so today, I'm in here talking to you guys. This morning was obviously prepping for this. My daughter has a dance recital practice later on tonight. I take a hip hop dance class, so I am in a recital later on tonight. And then later on this weekend, we've got more stuff like that to do. So I have no typical day, which is actually kind of how I like it. So fast forward through all that, I got to the point a couple of years ago where I was very, very interested in the father-daughter relationship. I have two girls that are both sitting back here, and I grew up with all brothers. And so the relationship between a father and daughter is not something that I watched very often. I did not see that. And so I was obviously very curious about how I could be the best dad that I could be to both of the girls. And so I started asking a lot of questions, especially when they got old enough to the point where we were having conversations with each other back and forth. It wasn't just, hey, go clean your room, or picking them up and moving them from one room to another. It was sitting down at the kitchen table and actually having conversations. So I started asking a lot of my female friends at that time, over the course of a couple of years, hey, what's this relationship really like between a dad and a daughter? How do you interact with each other? How did it change over time? How did it start when you were younger? And did it change, or was it the same over time? And the stories that my friends would tell me were just absolutely amazing, just astounding. Sometimes I would go to a dinner or a lunch with a friend from out of town, and she would talk about her dad most of the time that we were at that lunch. And so as the stories kept coming, and as they were getting bigger and bolder and just more vivid, I thought, well, there has to be, number one, I can't be the only person that is wondering how to be the best dad to his daughters. And then number two, there has to be something out there that helps me rather than having all these one-off conversations with people over time. And there were a lot of father-daughter books out there, but there weren't any necessarily like what I thought was going to be the most helpful to me and then to the people that I knew that were having daughters as well. So one night in the middle of the night, I literally woke up in bed and thought that a letter format for a book could be something really, really cool, something really different. And people, it's one thing if a PhD or a medical doctor tells you certain things to do with your children. It's a very another thing if you read a very intimate letter from somebody to somebody else. It gives you a whole different perspective on what that relationship is like. So I thought the letters were great. I decided to put that into action last year. I asked 85 of my friends to write a letter to their dad. 32 of them decided that they would accept that challenge and write a letter to their dad so that we could put it into the book. Some of them were, bold enough or courageous enough to sign their name to the letter. There were others that wanted to say, I'm just going to end it with a thank you or I love you, and that's it. So we made sure that in the book that people were allowed to, if they wanted to, make it anonymous. Because all of the letters in the book are not the rosy, peachy, sunshiny, Dad, you're the greatest thing in the world, and I love you. Some of them were not that. I'm going to read one today that's a little bit not peachy, if you will. But there's some others that I'm going to read that all have a different kind of take on what the relationship could be. So as I was putting the book together, I had the 32 letters. My wife and kids can attest. I had all 32 of them spread out on the floor of the basement. And looking to see, once I had them in my hands, what was important in the letters. What were the themes that were coming to life that I didn't necessarily go into writing the book thinking I was going to write about. And there were 9 themes that popped out of the book. I'll talk about a couple of those, but you can certainly see more of them. I've got some copies in the back that you can pick up and look through too. So what I plan to do today is just obviously give you a little bit of background on the book and why I wrote it, and then also read through probably about 6 of the letters, talk about some of the themes that were in them. As we approach Father's Day coming up, it's a very easy time to reflect back on Dad and what Dad meant, or daughters, which are, all that kind of stuff. What really is important about that relationship. So I thought this would be a great time to take the chance to be able to read a couple of these to you. Maybe get you thinking about your own dad, and then I'll have some copies in the back if you want to pick up as you leave. So we will start there, and I'll pick up a couple of the letters from the book, and it might be easier for me to sit as I'm flipping through this book, so if you'll just bear with me while I do this. The very first theme in the book that was very clearly in a couple of letters came through, but to me spoke the most about what the biggest foundation is that you need for a really good relationship, is loving unconditionally. So the intro that I wrote to that section says, I am very much a believer that strong foundations are what make the impossible possible. Loving your daughter unconditionally turns dreams to realities. It unlocks potential. It makes trying new things without fear of failure something that your daughter does rather than just thinking about. Loving unconditionally sets the strongest foundation for a unique bond between dad and daughter. There are a couple of different letters that really spoke about loving unconditionally and the way that that affected that particular daughter over time. So the one that I'm going to read to you today is the one that I actually kicked the book off with. It's from a friend of mine who decided to actually sign her name to it. Her name is Kate. She lives up in New Hampshire. Her letter starts off, I think, very funny because I'm a sports fan. So I'll read this to you guys. It says, Dear Dad, we've always had a special bond. Call it what you will. From the apple that didn't fall far from your tree, the relationship between father and daughter. When I once complained jokingly to Mom that she loved her son more than me, her very straight-faced response was, well, your father loves you more. I've never questioned the love from either one of you. Now that I have a daughter, I think about the power of love between people, and it reminds me of the first thing that you ever told me. I know this story well because you tell it at dinner parties, to new parents, and to my boyfriends growing up. In the delivery room when I was born, you said you held me in your arms and whispered, I will love you unconditionally for the rest of your life, and the Red Sox will always break your heart. Everyone laughs and remembers the second part. I remember the first, that has defined our bond. Now that I'm a parent, I think about how profound those first words were. And while I'm extremely happy the second part has turned out to be only half true, I'm especially glad that the first hasn't wavered. The feeling that I was loved unconditionally enabled me to grow up and feel secure, even when things weren't perfect. It allowed me to hear your anger when I did something wrong, take your criticism when I asked for your opinion, even when I didn't ask, and gave me the self-confidence to take risks, seek challenges, and admit failure. If you have love, you have something. You can't underestimate the importance of telling a person you love them unconditionally. You were always so vocal about it. You didn't expect me to know that you loved me just because you were my dad. You made sure I knew that you chose to love me. You told me explicitly that you loved me in every phone call, every evening we said goodnight, at least once a day, and after every fight. You wouldn't let me walk away as a child unless I said it too. We even developed our own code for how much we loved each other. I love you 7, I once said when you asked me just how much I loved you. It is to the moon and back. You extended this love beyond your children, showing us that you don't need to be born into unconditional. You loved Mom instantly and for 40 plus years until she died. And you continue to love her now, and you don't keep it a secret. You have invited others into this circle and treated them as a family. When I've seen people fall from your graces, everyone knows that if they needed you, you would whisper in their ear again. You have shown me the power this love instills. You have truly loved me unconditionally for my whole life. I am grateful. It does not mean you treat me like I have no faults. You have always told me that you will be honest with me. I can't say I always like this approach you've taken. I much prefer hearing Moms, if you don't have something nice to say, please don't say it at all, approach to life. But I do know that it's always easier to hear your truth because I know there's an unconditional band-aid of love to put on when truth hurts. I love you 7, Kate. So that's Kate's letter. I felt like one of the best ones that I had to kick off the book for 2 reasons. One, because of the way she speaks of her dad, because of the unconditional love that he showed to her, because of the way that he treated her over time. And loving unconditionally, like I said, I feel like is the cornerstone, one of the biggest foundations to having that great relationship between father and daughter. One of the things I will say about this one in particular, and the importance of telling people that you love them and that unconditional love is there, is that Kate's father actually passed away last Wednesday. So she gave him the book about 3 weeks ago. He read the letter, saw it, they had their moments between the 2 of them. And then she called me this weekend and she's like, I'm really, really glad that I gave him that book. So another lesson, the universe works in very, very mysterious ways. I put this book together, I released it at the end of January. So when I put it out there, it was kind of like, all right, this will be good for Father's Day, it'll be good for some other stuff too. Never realizing the impact then that some of these letters could have on the people that wrote them and the people that received them. So I did a discussion probably about 2 months ago about the power of the letter and how strong the power of the letter can be. If you think back to when the last time was you received a handwritten letter that was to you from somebody you cared about, what the emotion was that was behind that letter. And when Kate told me that this weekend, I felt that with her. So that was Kate's letter about loving unconditionally. The next one I'm going to read is in a section that I call Be Mindful. And being mindful, I'll read here in a second for you, is really about keeping your eye on the ball, for lack of a better term. So being your dad's daughter is an art, not a science. With no manual, we test some things, see if they work, and then we try again. Sometimes we work so hard over here that we forget about what's over there. Sometimes it's by choice and sometimes by accident. But in either case, as a dad, it's our job to be mindful of our actions and the consequences that can come from them. So here is Miss Anonymous's letter. Hi Daddy, I know I don't always tell you how wonderful of a father you've been, but hopefully you get that from the little things I try to do to make sure you know I love you. You have done an amazing job of not just being a father, but fathering a daughter. You are more than merely the person who paid my tuition or reminded me that I didn't need that chump anyway whenever one of my relationships ended. You are the man who set the standard for what I would accept from the men in my life, and for that I'm eternally grateful. I always knew our relationship was special, but it wasn't until I became a young woman seriously dealing with men and establishing boundaries for how they would deal with me that I really understood the magnitude of your importance in my life and in the development of my character. I remember the point when I realized how important having grown up with my father as the man in my life was. It was around the time I was applying to business school, and I had become really good friends with some really outstanding young women. From the looks of it, we were all cut from the same cloth. Bright, young, attractive, if I do say so myself. Those are hers words, not mine. And heading into graduate programs at some of the country's most prestigious institutions, Harvard, Northwestern, Duke, you name it. As time went by, we became closer friends. I learned more about them and saw how they interacted with men, and more importantly, how their interactions were affected by men. We were all looking for the same thing: someone to love us, someone to settle down with, and someone to call our own. The variable that became strikingly evident was what I call the father factor. I began to realize that while we all had our issues with the guys we dated, no one ever disrespected me or treated me as badly as they often treated my friends. This was because, as a result of my relationship with you, I knew the minimums a man needed to deliver and recognize when they weren't being met. I always considered if a man can't do more for me than my daddy does, then why put up with it? So when he wasn't treating me like a lady, I was okay saying when. This alone made my 20s much easier and much less dramatic. But Daddy, I have to tell you something. While you are an amazing father, you were a terrible husband. And witnessing your disregard for my mother, your wife, has had an effect on me as well. As I have become older and am now considering marriage, I realize that I have subconsciously developed this overwhelming flight response when situations with the man I love are not ideal. It's not because I don't want to be his wife, but because I don't want to turn out like you, unfulfilled in my marriage, but too afraid to be on my own to leave. People often say that women marry men like their fathers. I hope that's true. What scares me to death is that the man I marry will be less like my father and more like my mother's husband. I know it seems contradictory to feel this way, and I don't know how to explain it much better than I have. On the one hand, because of you, I have standards and boundaries. On the other hand, I lack patience and resolve. So what do you do with this? Honestly, I just wanted you to know how your influence and your role in my decision-making processes has evolved in a way I had not imagined. I don't love you any less or think any less of you. It's just interesting to understand the many different ways you have impacted my life. You are one man with many roles, and I truly have always felt how important your role as a father is to you. I guess the real shocker is that I now also feel how unimportant your role of a husband may have been as well. Just something to think about. I love you. So a very interesting dynamic that came from Miss Anonymous in that case. And one that gets, as I read this over and over and over again, one that makes me think about very, very clearly the example I set and the things that I do on a daily basis that will then influence my daughters. Follow up to Miss Anonymous's letter here, she got engaged last week. So she has decided that whatever was going on, or whatever had come from the letter with her, obviously was not enough for her to not get engaged to the man she's been dating for about 5 years now. So happy ending there for the moment. She is now engaged. A couple of my favorite letters are these next two, and they fall under the section that I call Be Amazing. And the way that I preface this chapter is this. A dad is human, a dad is a person. You're not just a dad, you have interests, you have hobbies, likes and dislikes. Some of those revolve around your daughter, and some of those were formed long before she came along. These letters tell the stories of dads who played what is sometimes the hardest role to play as a dad, themselves. What came from that was amazing. So these are absolutely two of my favorites. This first one is from a friend of mine here in town. And she starts, Dear Dad, I compiled a list of things I want to thank you for because those things have influenced the direction of my life in some way. Although admittedly sometimes not in the direction that you actually wanted them to go. Thank you for the quirky, unforgettable songs that can soothe any child. The quote-unquote Daisy and Ginger song, dedicated to the best beagle puppies a girl could ever have, is still ingrained in my memory. She says I'm humming it right now. It was the perfect song for bedtime, and I hear that even as you put your new grandbaby to sleep just last week, you sang it as well. Thank you for the impromptu dance sessions in the kitchen that helped prepare me for the stage later in life. And while I'm sure you'd love it if I was a prima ballerina, being a professional belly dancer is just as good, right? Thank you for introducing me to awesome music in my younger years. Jimi Hendrix's Band of Gypsies is a much better way to kick off the Christmas morning gift opening frenzy than traditional Christmas songs. Although, just to be sure you don't lose your edge on that one, it was Mom who asked for Metallica tickets for Mother's Day. Thank you for the life advice. I vividly remember you telling me as a teenager, don't get pregnant and don't get arrested. Success! No grandbabies or arrests. Although now that I'm 30, married, and refusing to have kids, you're probably eating those words on that don't get pregnant part. I'm just doing what you told me to do. Thank you for the driving advice. Now, I will pause here and say that her father was a UPS driver and had something along the lines of about 2.2, 2.3 million miles straight as a UPS driver without an accident. So his driving advice is a big part of her letter. Thank you for the driving advice. Anyone who drives with me knows the quote-unquote Katie's Dad's School of Driving Tips. To name a few, check your mirrors every 5 to 10 seconds, Always roll with the flow of traffic, don't speed, and never turn right into the middle lane. Admittedly, your back seat was sometimes annoying, but I guess you don't get to millions of miles of safe driving without knowing a thing or two about how to drive. Thank you for being a hippie at heart. You are a legend with my high school friends for letting me go to Woodstock in '99, even after Mom said no. Sorry, Mom, you have to be the mean parent for this part. I still remember you waking me up on the morning tickets went on sale when Mom wasn't home, and driving me to the Thriftway Ticketmaster hub saying, I didn't get to go to Woodstock, and I can't let that happen to you. Thank you for having a weird sense of humor. The hours we spent watching Ren and Stimpy have definitely influenced my own sense of humor. And while I know raising a teenage daughter was tough, at least I could make you laugh by singing Stimpy's favorite tune. Thank you for my exposure to the outdoors. I vividly remember camping out at various sites across Ohio, boating at Lake Cumberland, and hiking at Buzzard's Roost, or being carried at Buzzard's Roost when I didn't want to hike. While some of those trips ended with thousands of bug bites covering my entire body, or dirty fishing hooks embedded underneath my skin, I still learned to savor and appreciate being outside in nature. Speaking of Lake Cumberland, thank you for the advice on how to survive it. My friends and I always review the Katie's Dad's checklist of lake rules, even though we're now all 30 plus years of age. Number 1, don't get in a golf cart with anyone going down the hill. Number 2, don't get on a boat with anyone who appears to be drinking. And number 3, if you get bit by a poisonous snake, kill it and take it with you to the hospital. Check, check, check. Wait, except on that one about the snake. Are you serious? So to sum up all this, all I can really say is thank you, Daddy. I wouldn't be where I am today without you. Love you, Rain. So very different than the previous letter. You can tell why these are some of my favorites for sure. They really talk about Dad being Dad, but also being himself, and the influence that that can have on his daughter. Sorry, my bookmarks got out of place here. Hold on one second. Alright, next one, along the same lines. Very, very good. Dear Dad, these last couple of years as I've started to consider myself an actual adult, I find myself thinking a lot about how I was brought up, your style as a father, and you as a person. Is all of it perfect? No, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Thank you for having the patience to comb out my long, wet hair when I was too young to manage it and just couldn't bear Mom's aggressive touch. I think she was the only one bothered by the fact that you never really got the tangles underneath. Thanks for teaching me how to bait a hook. I don't remember the last time I did it, and I'm not sure when I ever will again, but at least I know how. Mom tells the story about how nervous she was that her little girl was handling sharp things when you were so patient and trusting that I would follow your instructions. What a perfect analogy for the rest of my childhood and adolescence. I don't think you ever really spoiled me too much that I can remember, but I will say that there's no better breakfast than half a grapefruit that you sectioned perfectly waiting for me in the refrigerator. Ask how often I eat grapefruits now. I'm just too lazy. Depending on the year and my age, I was either excited or annoyed by the fact that you always insisted Sissy and I wear dresses for Easter and Christmas. Little girls should wear nice dresses, you said. Old-fashioned and impractical as it seemed, hunting for eggs in white tights and white patent leather shoes in mud. Slipping along Grandma's driveway in the snow and cold in white tights and black patent leather shoes. It stayed with me. Now I find myself teetering along in heels and pencil skirts. It's a holiday, I tell myself. You're supposed to dress nice. Your final words on fashion are probably, hey, be a trendsetter. The response to complaints of not having Guess jeans in the latest fashions. Yet your fondness for vintage cool, or maybe it's just your refusal to get rid of anything, brings to mind the year you wore an old green corduroy suit to the family Christmas Eve party. Mom was mortified, and I was in awe. It was probably 1995 or so, and grunge was God. Corduroy was everywhere. You weren't trying to be hip or ironic. You were just dressing nice for the holiday. I got over not having stylish clothes, but I'll never get over that green suit. Your most iconic outfit has got to be your greasy blue work uniform. I'd look for that uniform from the stage at every dance recital. I'm ashamed to remember that your uniform embarrassed me sometimes. Now I think about it and smile because it means that you rushed straight from work to be there every year. I think about it with pride because if you weren't in that uniform, I wouldn't have been in those dance lessons. Thanks for taking me out into the woods every year to pick a cedar tree for Christmas. I was too young to understand why our tree never looked like the $50 trees that other people had, but it didn't matter. All 5 of us decorated it together, but I got to put the Christmas spirit on the top. I love those mornings in the woods, but I don't miss the bagworms on the cedar trees. I think about the time you told me that Bob Dylan was a poet, and how for the first time in quite a while, I felt like you and I had something in common. I don't think anyone who truly listens to Lay Down Your Weary tune can disagree. This fondness for classic rock, combined with enough afternoons spent at car shows and countless evenings spent at the drag strip, gave me just enough knowledge to be able to talk to boys about something they actually found interesting. I think some of them would have rather hung out in the garage with you than go on a date with me to the movies. But to this day, any guy who spends any time at our house always asks about you. Then he immediately recounts how impressed he was that any time we left the house, after Mom's warning to be careful, be home on time, and call if we were going anywhere else, your final words for the night were always, be cool. You trusted that you and Mom had done your job and that I knew how to act once I left the house, that I was smart enough to make good choices. I was certainly no angel, but there were plenty of moments where I consider you telling me if something doesn't feel right, it's probably not, and go from there. I think it worked. You must have too, when you and I had to talk about whether I should go away for college or not, and you told me that it was important for everyone to spend some time away from home. I needed that. Even though I've been away from home for a long time, the first warm spring day makes me want to ride in the back of your Norton. I think about summer nights on the back porch, listening to the Reds while you and your pet bird dog and you chew tobacco. Sometimes when I wash my face at the end of the day, I wish you were in the next room playing guitar along with the Stones or Beatles songs like you used to, like so many nights that you did when I was younger. Thank you for being you, for the parenting decisions you and Mom made, for the imagination I developed as a result of what we couldn't afford, for the times our family spent together because we had nowhere else to go and no money to do anything, for everything. I think most of the memories and experiences that shaped our relationship were things you'd have done regardless, that you didn't even realize you were doing, and that you still do now. And that's cool. Love your baby in a rotten age. These 2 letters together are really, really good examples that I feel of how you can go to Disney World and create really big memories or go on real big trips and do those kinds of things. But the little things over time add up, are remembered, and certainly affect folks as they continue in life like they did to Katie and Robin. So the last one that I will read is from a friend of mine who wrote her letter. It took her, I think, a month and a half to write her letter because her father had passed probably 2 years previous. So I sat down with her at a lunch probably a month or so after the book had come out, and we were talking about the book, and she's like, it took me about 50 days to write that letter. And I was like, 50 days? Like, you had a good relationship with your dad. Like, I didn't think that would be that difficult to do. She said, every time I started that letter, I cried. I got through like a paragraph and couldn't get through anymore. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. So her letter actually closes the book. And the section that I've got hers in is called Love Forever. So it runs through the 9 themes, and then it leads into her letter. So I wrote, love unconditionally, be patient, be mindful, be amazing, be the example, be there and be accountable, be dependable, and be their hero. Those are the other 8 themes in the book. Why? So you can love forever. And this is Peg's note. Dad, instead of talking to you daily, thanking you for all the things that you've done for me, I thought it a better idea to write you a letter. As I get older, I'm noticing that my childhood memories are starting to fade. And before they're gone, I want to make sure you know how much I love you, even if I didn't always show it. How excited I was for the first time Mom let me walk down to the corner by myself and wait for your car to come down the street on your way home from work. You'd stop, I'd jump in, and it was our special time alone. If I was lucky, it was your night to get milk, and we'd pick out some ice cream to bring home. No matter where you went, you always seemed to bring something special home with you. Trips downtown automatically meant fresh donuts, but the best were the fresh lobsters from your business trips up east. How much fun we always had sitting on the kitchen floor, watching our lobsters run for their lives. Being the child of an engineer is a special treat, special in quotes. Help with homework always turned into an hour-long discussion, even if it really only needed to be 5 minutes. Everything had to be discussed and analyzed. Pictures had to be drawn, and only then did an answer get revealed. Home projects turned into major learning opportunities. The graph paper came out, studious measurements were taken, math formulas were memorized, and then finally the project started and the fun began. Measure twice, cut once, and check your work became your mantras, and I find myself using both directives continually to this day. You made me a toolbox when I moved into my very first apartment, and I think of you every time I have one of those tools in my hand. College, careers, and children brought challenges that you were always there to help with. No matter how many times I fell down, you were always there to pick me up. Nothing got in the way of you being at the kids' soccer, baseball, basketball games. You were the first in line for Grandparents' Day, and you were never too busy to help them with a science project. You were such a special part of their lives. We still have many laughs remembering all the fun we had together, especially the Thanksgiving that the turkey didn't cook, because you insisted that the lid did not have to go on the roaster. Now that you're gone, I miss not seeing you all the time, not having you over for dinner, and most especially, I miss the really special times we had together, just you and me. The long conversations, particularly about the early years, when you met Mom, joined the Navy, went to college, and started working. All the memories you have given me have kept you very close to my heart. I know you're watching down on me and still taking care of me. I tip a beer, always in a room temperature glass, in your memory. Love you, Dad. And that was Peg's letter. So you can see from the letters there that I read, just a couple, that there are a couple of different themes that obviously pop. And I wanted to make sure for anybody who got a hold of the book, they recognize that those were themes that not necessarily I had set out to write, but themes that daughters, as they were writing their letters, appeared. And that those were important to daughters, and such that if a dad was reading the book, he'd pick up on that and say, hey, these are probably 9 things that I should probably keep in mind over time. I appreciate you guys coming today, listening to a couple of the letters. I think the book, especially as Father's Day approaches, but at any point in time, is good just to recount or to use to recall some of the great memories that you have of your own childhood, with your dad, with your daughters, whatever the case might be. I have books in the back that I will be selling if any of you are interested in picking any copies up today, and I will stay here for as long as need be if any of you have any questions. All right. Thank you very much, guys.